We tend to think Rome fell because of the barbarians finally breaking through, that the Goths gathered at the gates, that Alaric came over the walls with some screaming horde behind him, and that civilization itself ended at the point of a foreign sword. That's the Hollywood version of history. The reality is actually worse. More accurately, it's more revealing. Rome didn't fall because it ran out of soldiers. It fell because it executed the one man still holding the system together, a half-Vandal general named Stilicho. He defeated Alaric 3 separate times. He held the Rhine frontier together. He kept the grain moving, kept the armies paid, and somehow kept a collapsing political structure functioning. With silver he had to drag out of the Senate that hated him for forcing the issue. For 13 years, he was basically the only thing standing between the Western Empire and total disintegration. And then, Rome killed him. Not because he was incompetent, not because he betrayed the Empire. They killed him because he was never considered Roman enough. The Senate issued the order, and the Emperor signed it. And the machine, because that's what the late Empire had become by this point, a machine, looked at the one man still making it work, and decided he was a threat. What happens next unfolds almost immediately, not over generations, or even decades. The legions mutiny. Around 10,000 Germanic auxiliaries defect directly to Alaric's camp. The borders don't really break so much as dissolve. And then Alaric walks into an undefended Italy, and then sacks Rome in 410. Without Stilicho, there's no resistance, and there's no real Rome anymore. And this is where the story changes, because this isn't really about barbarians at the gate anymore. It's about what happens when a system becomes so consumed by fear of the outsider that it destroys the one insider still capable of saving it. Empires don't usually die from the outside in. They destroy their own immune system first, and then call it patriotism. And if you understand what happened to Stilicho, not just the dates or the personalities, but the mechanics underneath it, you start recognizing the same pattern in other places, including now. Welcome back to The Roman Pattern. I'm Jeremy Ryan Slate, CEO of Command Your Brand. You can check us out over at commandyourbrand.com. And now, our story. To understand what really died in August of 408, you first have to understand what Rome had already become by that point. This was not the Rome of Augustus. It wasn't even the Rome of Constantine. By 395, the Western Roman Empire was basically a hollow administrative shell wrapped around a functioning military structure. The border still stretched from Britain all the way down to North Africa. On paper, it remained the most powerful state on Earth. But on the ground, it was a body being kept upright by one remaining muscle. That muscle was the army. And the man commanding it was Flavius Stilicho. What's interesting about Stilicho is that he really should not have existed inside the Roman system at all. His father was a Vandal, one of the very tribes Rome had spent centuries fighting against. His mother was Roman. In an earlier era, that alone would have disqualified him from serious power. But by the late 4th century, the empire was running out of options. It had run out of Romans willing to fight. It had also run out of Romans willing to pay taxes. Honestly, it had run out of Romans willing to keep the bureaucracy functioning at all. The machine did what systems often do when they start breaking down. It began recruiting from the outside because it no longer had enough strength inside itself. And Stilicho rises through that environment. But he rises through a system that's already dying. If you really want to understand why Rome collapsed later, you have to look at the fault lines already running underneath it by this point. Not just the dates, but the mechanics. The first fault line, which we've beaten to death at this point, was money. By 385, the Roman currency had been debased for more than a century. The old silver denarius was gone and replaced by what were mostly bronze covered in a thin silver wash. The empire could no longer pay its soldiers in hard money consistently. So instead, it paid them in promises, land, taxes, exemptions, and the right to loot conquered territory. And once that happens, loyalty changes. The army stops being loyal to Rome itself and becomes loyal to the general capable of actually rewarding them. Rome is no longer the source of stability, but their commander is. The second fault line was borders, which has been our largest reaching ex-post to this point. The Roman frontier stretched from roughly 3,000 miles across the Rhine, the Danube, and the eastern deserts. Every mile required soldiers, supplies, roads, and money. But the population of the Western Empire was shrinking at the same time. Plague, civil war, economic collapse, all of it feeding into each other, which, by the way, Kyle Harper has a great book on. Fewer people meant fewer recruits. Fewer recruits meant thinner frontiers. And thinner frontiers, that meant more crossings. And that's actually an important distinction here. Most of these groups are not evading in the way that people imagine. They were crossing. They were farmers, families, mercenaries, refugees, and entire communities. Moving into Roman territory because Rome still represented relative stability. Rome needed them for labor and military manpower, but Rome also feared them culturally and politically. The empire could never fully resolve that contradiction. Then you get the third fault line, which was power itself. The political system of the late empire had evolved into something strangely functional and deeply monstrous at the same time. The emperor was no longer really a battlefield leader, but he was a symbol, almost a sacred figure, surrounded by a court of officials, advisors, eunuchs, and layers of insulation. Real power belonged to whoever controlled access to him, whoever could whisper into his ear, whoever could convince him that someone else represented a threat. The system had a name, the Consortium, the Imperial Council. It rewarded survival far more than competence, which meant Stilicho was eventually going to collide with it, because Stilicho doesn't rise through court politics. He rises through results. He gets them. As a younger officer, he served on diplomatic missions to Persia. He negotiates treaties. He commands cavalry in the battle. He develops a reputation for effectiveness, not charisma. And actually, that's probably the key thing about him. He wasn't especially political, but he was useful. And Theodosius the Great notices that usefulness immediately. Theodosius, who becomes the last man to rule a united Roman Empire, understands something that later systems forget completely. Competence matters more than blood when the system is under stress. So he promotes Stilicho to Magister Militum, the Master of Soldiers, which is the highest military office in the Western Empire. Then he does something even more significant. He marries Stilicho to Serena, his adopted niece and a member of the imperial family, a daughter of the imperial house handed to a half-Vandal general. That wasn't romance anymore, but strategic planning. Theodosius knew his sons were children, not just physically, but likely would be children for a very long time the more we learn about them. Honorius was 10 years old. Arcadius was 17. Neither had military experience and had never really governed anything serious. He builds a structure around them. Stilicho commands the armies, and Serena, well, she provides the dynastic legitimacy. Together they stabilize the empire until the boys mature, which to some points never happened. But Theodosius dies in January of 395, and suddenly Stilicho, at 35 years old, becomes the most powerful man in the Western Empire, which also means the machine immediately starts preparing to destroy him. Now at the same time, another figure enters the story, Alaric the Goth. And Alaric is important not just because of some mindless barbarian warlord. He served inside the Roman military system, and he understands Roman tactics, logistics, and their weaknesses. He also has a legitimate grievance. The Goths had been promised land and payment for military service under Theodosius, and after his death, those promises, well, they basically collapse. So Alaric does what commanders throughout history tend to do when agreements fail. He begins extracting payments by force. In 395, he marches through Thrace and Macedonia, and eventually he reaches the gates of Athens. Stilicho mobilizes immediately. He gathers the Western field army, crosses into Greece, and corners Alaric in Arcadia. And then Constantinople intervenes. They order him to stand down. The Eastern court, which is controlled by officials like Eutropius and Rufinus, they don't want Stilicho becoming too powerful in the East. They don't want a half-Vandal general becoming the savior of the empire. They don't want the Western Empire gaining leverage through military success. So they declare Stilicho a public enemy and order him to withdraw. He obeys. And that's where you start seeing the real pattern emerge here. The machine is no longer optimizing for victory, but internal control. It's better to let a hostile army escape than allow the wrong men to become indispensable. And that pattern repeats constantly in declining systems. We see it modernly. Competence becomes threatening because competence creates independent authority. Alaric isn't defeated here, but he's delayed. And eventually that delay runs out. By 401, Alaric invades Italy itself. Not with just a raid, but an actual invasion. He crosses the Julian Alps, bypasses Milan, which is the western capital at this point, and he moves toward Rome. The Senate panics because at this point, they're just men who spent decades managing estates and debating philosophy. They don't have armies of their own. They haven't dealt with a real existential military threat on Italian soil in generations. But what they have is Flavius Stilicho. And Stilicho responds with what is honestly an extraordinary military improvisation. He strips troops from the Rhine frontier and pulls garrisons out of Britain. He recruits Federate forces, Alans, Huns, Goths, and basically anyone who's capable of fighting at this point. Then he marches towards Alaric and meets him at Pollentia in 402. It's Easter Sunday. The Goths believe no Roman commander would attack on a holy day, but Stilicho isn't any commander. He attacks anyway. The battle becomes chaotic, and Roman cavalry crash into the Gothic camp. Alaric's family is captured, and thousands of Goths are taken prisoner. Alaric retreats, but he'll be back. Stilicho does something afterward that becomes politically fatal for him. He makes a deal. Instead of exterminating the Goths or driving them completely out of Italy, he offers Alaric a Roman military position. Strategically, it makes perfect sense. Alaric's forces could become a buffer against worse threats, and a deployable military asset for the empire itself. But the Senate doesn't see strategy. They see a half-Vandal general negotiating with barbarians. That's when the whispers begin. Stilicho is too close to the Goths. He's too ambitious. He wants his son on the Western throne. None of this is likely true. But systems like this eventually stop needing truth. They just need targets. Then the real catastrophe arrived. On the last day of December in 406, the Rhine freezes solid. For centuries, that river had functioned as a barrier between Rome and the Germanic world. Legions guarded those crossings for generation after generation. But many of those troops had already been pulled away by Stilicho to defend Italy from Alaric. Now the frontier is exposed, and tens of thousands cross in a single winter. Vandals, Suevi, Alans, entire emigrating populations moving into Gaul. Again, this isn't really a traditional invasion. It's more like a mass movement of peoples through a collapsing border structure. Sounds a lot like the southern border. And there are no legions left to stop him. They sweep across Gaul and burn cities, seize farmland, and keep pushing south. This is exactly the kind of border failure that Stilicho had spent years trying to prevent. But the political system never gave him resources to actually stabilize the frontier for the long term. The Senate refuses major taxation increases. The Eastern Empire withdraws reinforcements. And Honorius, now emperor, barely understands what's happening around him. In fact, he's interested in his chickens. He's not an evil man, but he's quite irrelevant. He's raised inside the palace at Ravenna, isolated from military life, administration, and reality itself. He doesn't read military dispatches. In fact, he doesn't care. He raises those chickens we just talked about. And honestly, that detail matters because it shows the system has been selecting for over generations. Bureaucratic survival has gradually filtered out leaders capable of commanding armies or understanding a real crisis. What remains is a ceremonial figurehead. But the figurehead still has one crucial power. He can sign execution orders. And the people surrounding him, they're ready for him to use that. The man who ultimately destroys Stilicho is named Olympius. Most people haven't heard of him, which is fitting because figures like this almost always operate indirectly. Olympius is a palace official. He's a master of court politics, and he whispered accusations, maybe even a eunuch. He understands that the fastest route to power is eliminating who currently holds it. He starts constructing a narrative around Stilicho. He tells Honorius that Stilicho is secretly conspiring with Alaric. He intends to place his son Eucharius on the Eastern throne. His barbarian blood guarantees he's going to eventually be betrayed. None of it's true. Stilicho has spent 13 years fighting to hold the Western Empire together. He's defeated Alaric repeatedly, preserved the Rhine frontier as long as possible, and maintained the state largely through force of competence. But proximity to power changes how systems process information. Facts begin mattering less than the actual narrative. Olympius tells the clearer story than Stilicho does. In August of 408, Honorius signs the order. Stilicho is declared a public enemy in the West now. His allies are arrested and his family becomes a target. His life is forfeit. The man who saved the empire multiple times is suddenly defined as its greatest threat, because the machine has decided that he is. Stilicho hears the news before they even arrive to arrest him. And this is one of the greatest turning points of the story, because he absolutely could have resisted, but he chose not to. 10,000 Federate troops are personally loyal to him. He could march on Ravenna, seize power, and likely win. I don't think those chickens are stopping him. He could become exactly what his enemies claim he already is, but he doesn't want to. Instead, he takes refuge in a church and claims sanctuary. He's trying to de-escalate the situation, but he's not really winning. The soldiers alive swear he'll be safe and promise him mercy if he comes out. So Stilicho walks out of the church. They seize him immediately, read the charges, and draw their swords. Flavius Stilicho is executed on the 22nd of August in 408, at 48 years old. Soon after, his son Eucharius is hunted down and killed. His wife Serena is eventually strangled during Alaric's later siege of Rome. They purge his supporters. His federate troops lose their positions. The machine completes the purge expertly. And the consequences begin almost immediately. First, the federate soldiers who served under Stilicho for years, Goths, Huns, Alans, men whose loyalty to Rome had depended on their relationship with Stilicho, well, now their commander is dead. Their families are being targeted, so they leave. Roughly 10,000 of them march directly to Alaric's camp. The army Stilicho built to defend Italy becomes the army that will later destroy it. Then the Gothic auxiliaries serving in the regular Roman legions watch what happened, and they get the message. Your service doesn't make you Roman, but your blood matters more. And your blood is never going to be Roman anymore. So they desert too, not in the dozens, but in the thousands. Then the borders collapse even further. Without a functioning field army, the Rhine crossing spread unchecked through Gaul and Spain. Constantine III rises out of Britain and seizes power in Gaul. The Western Empire starts fragmenting into competing regional territories. And all this happens in less than 2 years. That's the part that people often miss. Stilicho had been holding the entire system together through his relationships, through competence, and through his force of personality. But there's no deeper institutional structure underneath him capable of surviving his removal. No replacement, no succession, and no mechanism. There's no stable state bureaucracy behind him. The emperor kills the only person capable of saving the system, and then he discovers there's nobody left. By 408, Alaric marches directly into Rome. The city hasn't faced a foreign army in roughly 8 centuries. Rome is still the symbolic center of the world psychologically, even if the administrative capital has moved elsewhere. And Alaric actually doesn't want to destroy it. He just wants leverage. He demands payment and land for his people and also a formal military office, that thing he'd been refused. The Senate negotiates a ransom, and Alaric accepts it. Then Honorius, who's safe behind the marshes of Ravenna, refuses to ratify the agreement. He's still got those chickens. The system can no longer even negotiate rationally its own interests. Alaric besieges Rome 3 separate times, 408, 409, and again in 410. 410 seems to be the one we always talk about. Each time the Senate negotiates. Each time, Honorius refuses. Then on August 24th, 410, somebody opens the gates. We don't know who. Maybe a slave, a sympathizer, maybe someone desperate enough to end the siege. Alaric enters the city. For 3 days, Rome is sacked. Now, historically, the sack itself is not the literal end of the empire, but psychologically, it changes everything. For 8 centuries, Rome had represented invincibility, eternal power, the center of the civilization itself. Now the city is stripped, humiliated, and violated by an army that Rome itself once employed. And the man most capable of preventing it has already been executed by his own government. And that's why this story matters beyond Rome, because the pattern keeps repeating, even if the chickens disappear. The system encounters crisis and begins recruiting talented outsiders from the margins. People that are valued for competence rather than pedigree. The outsiders perform well, and they solve the problem the establishment can't solve. They actually build authority from results. And initially the establishment tolerates them, because it doesn't have an alternative. But tolerance, it's not acceptance. The moment the crisis appears manageable again, the calculation changes. Now those outsiders, well, they look dangerous. What if they become too popular or indispensable? What if their loyalty is to the mission rather than the institution itself? And Rome knew it was. And slowly the machine turns against them. There's whispers and accusations, questions about their loyalty. Not because they failed, but it's because they succeeded. And actually, that's usually the most dangerous point in any institutional crisis. Not the crisis itself, but the moment afterward, when the old order attempts to reassert control over the people who navigated the emergency. Stilicho is officially executed for being half Vandal, but the real crime, it's competence. He's too effective and independent, and too difficult for the system to fully control. And because the system can't absorb him, it destroys him. Then in destroying him, it destroys itself. So when you look at Rome's 3 major fault lines, the parallels become uncomfortable. First, there's money, and we're living through the largest monetary experiment in history. Debt levels would have seemed impossible a generation ago, because central banks are constantly expanding liquidity just to keep the system functioning. Purchasing power is eroding gradually, rather than through clipped coins. It's a different mechanism on the surface, but it has the same underlying dynamic. As for those porous borders, Rome couldn't decide whether migrants represented a threat or a resource. The empire needed labor and military manpower, while simultaneously fearing cultural transformation and political instability. That contradiction never gets resolved. And honestly, the same debates exist now almost word for word. Then there's the power, or lack thereof. The late Roman Empire wasn't authoritarian in the simplistic way that people imagine. It was procedural. It had councils, laws, administrative structures, and formal decision-making systems. But eventually the procedures become hollow. Real authority belongs to whoever controls access, information, and the narrative inside the bureaucracy itself. The system's primary purpose shifts from functioning effectively to preserving itself. And Rome tells itself all the way through the decline that its institutions are permanent, stronger than anyone realizes, too advanced to truly collapse, maybe too big to fail. For centuries they believe it. Then eventually the structure reaches a point where it can no longer distinguish between a threat and a solution. And that's the real tragedy of Stilicho. Not simply that he dies, but his death was completely preventable. His body receives no great honors afterward. His monuments are torn down. His memory is officially erased from the system he spent his life defending, but history remembers him differently. The man condemned for not being Roman enough turns out to embody Rome more than the people who executed him. Some even call him the last Roman. He fought for the empire. He held the line for years. And then when the system came for him, he didn't burn it down, even though he probably could have. He walked out of the church and accepted his fate because he still believed in something larger than himself. And at that point, the system no longer did. Rome doesn't fall because it's suddenly overwhelmed from outside forces. Rome falls because internally it lost the ability to distinguish between competence and danger, between loyalty and threat, between the man holding the structure together and the forces actively pulling it apart. This is the pattern. Same mechanism, different century. This has been the Roman Pattern. I'm Jeremy Ryan Slate. Be sure to like this video, leave us a comment, and smash the subscribe button if you want more of the Roman Pattern.